You're on the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. We look at life through a biblical lens and we generally solve all the problems in the world in 2 hours or less. I want to take you back in time to the year 1790 and the great experiment called the United States of America. George Washington wrote, quote, "The establishment of our new government seemed to be the last great experiment for promoting human happiness." January 9th, 1790. A contemporary blog emphasizes my interest in this topic from the, quote, "historic present." The author says, America is an experiment. From the time of its first white settlement, America has been a place where people came to experiment with doing things differently. This is where I think the concept is warped. People came in order to do right things versus the way some king or queen wanted it done, to line their pockets and to enlarge their kingdom, the king's kingdom. That's why they came. But I digress. During the 18th century, this author continues, the experiment deepened as Americans began to speculate that they could form the first democratic nation in modern times. I would suggest that never under any circumstance did our founders envision a democracy. There are democratic responses to certain issues, but America is a republic. We are a nation governed by law, not opinion. Anyway, on and on went the experiment. Could we create a strong and stable centralized government? Could we grow without destabilizing? Could we solve the problem of slavery? Could we truly create a melting pot in which to forge Americans out of peoples of all nations? Could we give women the vote? Could we accept Jewish people as true Americans? Could we desegregate? Could we assure civil rights regardless of sexuality? As we think about what divides Americans today, this author says, I think it boils down to the fact that some Americans no longer want to experiment. They want to close the lab down. We've gone far enough to the unknown, into the unknown, making it known, they say. It's time to stop. In fact, we probably ought to go backward a little bit. You see, we were wrong to conduct some of our experiments in liberty, and that's the source of our problems. For example, gay people shouldn't be treated equally. Black people shouldn't run the country. Women shouldn't hold high office. Muslims shouldn't be granted habeas corpus. This comes from something called the Historic Present. It's a blog. Now, fast forward a little bit. Today, presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg says God will punish us for global warming. Note, Buttigieg, how do you pronounce it? Buttigieg, whatever, doesn't believe in the God of the Bible, so we have to ask, what God are you talking about? And if you've been watching any of this unfolding saga as these people are running for president, you know this particular guy, Buttigieg, claims to be a Christian. But I have called him a man who does not believe in the God of the Bible. So I want you to listen what he says. I want you to look at how he lives. I want you to look at his lifestyle and personal philosophy and judge for yourself if he believes in God. Everything about him says that he believes in my own God. You see, yours is the name, your God's name is the name I use to garner respectability, but I really don't believe in that God. His life and values are a living repudiation of the God of the Bible. You see, he's a homosexual. And he is overtly liberal, meaning he rejects eternal, absolute, objective moral standards. Not all, but just the ones that get in the way of his having fun or doing what he wants. And all of this from a former gay man who once lived Buttigieg's lifestyle. These are not my words. This is a former homosexual. He says of Buttigieg, he was a Rhodes Scholar who returned to the town where he grew up and was elected mayor before turning 30 years of age. He left City Hall in 2014 when, as a Navy reservist, he was deployed to the Afghanistan war. He's even an accomplished pianist. One commentator said of this Heartland mayor, he just seems so gosh darn Midwest wholesome. Now, continuing that theme, the Los Angeles Times says of Buttigieg, he is a Mr. Rogers haircut and howdy-doody grin. Buttigieg's deceased father was a Notre Dame University professor who, according to Paul Kengor, a man who was among a group of leftist professors who focused on injecting Marxism into the wider culture. He says Paul Kengor, or the article says Paul Kengor is an author and professor of political science at Grove City College, a private Christian liberal arts college in Grove City, Pennsylvania, the executive director and Center for Vision and Values, a Grove City College think tank policy center, and visiting fellow at the Hoover Institute on War, Revolution, and Peace at Stanford University. He says Buttigieg wants to overhaul the United States Supreme Court because he believes it's too conservative. He wants to get rid of the Electoral College. He says it's got to go and establish automatic voter registration. He believes that climate change is a national security threat and supports Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's proposed Green New Deal. This young mayor would like to institute national single-payer health care, that is, Medicare for all, and he wants stricter gun control laws. LifeNews.com ran an article in April of 2009 regarding Buttigieg. It said, quote, most troublingly, the man who is portrayed as epitomizing heartland innocence and Christian values is unashamedly pro-abortion, pro-gay, pro-transgender. A man who defies natural law is prudent. A man who fails to recognize the beauty of complementarity is wise. No man who champions the killing of babies yet to be born is empathetic, loving, or the least bit thoughtful. On the contrary, his untenable stances display a strong, assertive self-will, seeking to forcefully inject regressive, not progressive, policies on the American public. LifeSite News journalist, author, and self-described marriage, family, and children's rights activist Doug Mainwaring wrote, I once was a gay man taking part in Washington, D.C.'s vibrant gay community, dating and hanging out with guys who worked on Capitol Hill, in the White House, and at the Pentagon. Yet soon after writing a 2009 opinion piece for the Washington Post in defense of same-sex marriage, something happened. I found I was attempting to defend the indefensible. My stance could not hold up to logic nor reason. I realized that the bumper sticker memes of love is love, that if the heart fits, the parts fit, that marriage is about love, commitment, and responsibility, which were all employed to win over a general public that doesn't like to think deeply about things and prefers to avoid confrontation. All of these were helpful, unhelpful tropes, devoid of real meaning. I ended up defending the immutable definition of marriage in state houses across the country, organizing a brief for the U.S. Supreme Court during the Obergefell versus Hodge deliberations that told the stories of a dozen same-sex attracted men married to women who opposed genderless marriages such as Buttigieg's. Every single Democrat presidential hopeful treats homosexuality and transgenderism as normal. None dares depart from accepted dogma. Yet Buttigieg stands apart in that he is an active homosexual. The approaching 2020 rainbow, the harmonic convergence, exceeds what gay activists set out to achieve 30 years ago when Buttigieg was starting elementary school, which is to make gayness appear commonplace, if not normal, and to make criticism of homosexuality appear backward and antiquated. They wanted gayness to elicit nothing more than a shrug of the shoulders. Those goals seem quite modest today. In today's Democrat Party, gays and transgenders occupy the moral high ground. And in 2020, the power and reach of LGBT ideology will be at their zenith. That from lifenews.com. You see, in just 2 generations, the social, moral, political stance of Democrats has changed dramatically. With their bully pulpit, most entertainers are liberal, they have managed to create an almost global impression that thinking people, important people, are liberal people. People who are willing to think outside the box, try new things, abandon any and all things, even remotely Christian. They're willing to let people die in order to win. You think that last statement was a little too strong? Then what do you call AIDS? A disease our liberal leaders allowed to flourish in the United States rather than stamp it out. Deliberately. What am I talking about? The reality that when AIDS, as it's now called, first made landfall in the U.S., the federal agency tasked with maintaining good health among Americans abandoned the time-tested policy of isolating the carriers. They knew who this man was. They did not isolate him from the population. You say, well, who would do that? We would. Can you say Typhoid Mary? That's what we did the last time a disease with this virality struck our shores. We found the carrier and we isolated her. Instead, with this killing disease, they allowed the infected people to continue to live and have sexual contact with everyday Americans while they searched for a cure. They knew almost immediately that this was a killer disease. It killed 100% of the time. Yet they did not do what heretofore was standard operating procedure. When I was a young child in the late 1940s, my sister came down with scarlet fever. I say late 1940s, it was probably mid. It was called scarlatina. And I had to stay in the house while she was recovering, lest I be a spreader of this dangerous disease. The house was quarantined. There was a sign on the door outside. Nobody got in, nobody got out. These were before the days of penicillin. Today, it's been almost 40 years since the first case of AIDS was identified. And they've learned a lot. And they've done a great deal to control it. But a large number of people died unnecessarily. And there's still no cure. Where did it come from? In the early days, scientists said it spread to humans who were having sexual contact with monkeys in Africa. And that it was brought here by a Canadian man whose plane landed in New York City. A purely animal disease spread by a purely carnal and selfish human being, known to authorities. Now mainstream, just like any other disease over which we are condemned, should we be critical. And now we're being asked to vote for such a person as President of the United States. We've come a long way. A man who has already indicated a weak moral character, a skewed sense of propriety, right versus wrong, and a man who wants children to know there is nothing wrong with homosexual sexual intercourse. Oh, and a man we're able to accept as being a Bible Christian. That's how far this society has come. Probably the most advanced society the world has ever seen or known. And we have bought into this nonsense, hook, line, and sinker. And you still think we're getting better? You still think that God is not going to judge us? That Jesus is not returning? Put a stop to all this mess. Okay.